Hey guys, it's me, Melting Head Manga. Thank you for coming back. I finally decided on a name for my YouTube channel and overall brand, so that's great. Today we'll be commencing my multiple-parted series on developing one's personal art style, especially when it comes to traditionally manga and comics. This can range anywhere from head designs and hair designs and eye designs to overall physical proportions of bodies and movement and action, and then eventually we'll get into things like landscapes and cityscapes and nature and how to portray inanimate objects and inorganic materials. Now, for today specifically, for the first part, we're going to be talking about facial, head, hair, eyes, stuff like that, types of character design and getting into it. More specifically, referencing other more developed artists' styles and taking inspiration, seeing what you like, seeing what you don't like, playing with the ideas of design, learning the rules so you can eventually break them. Now, up first, we have here a face modeling sheet that I designed for us, just as a basic layout of interpreting each part and section of a standard head design for a character, if you're going to kind of come up with different styles that you want to experiment with, and so on and so forth. To the left, we have a basic head shape with guiding markers that would show where someone's hair would be, where someone's hairline would be, where someone's eyes, nose, and ears, and mouth would be, and so on and so forth. And then you can develop from there. You can get more specific, you can get really broad, but it's just a general framework. And to the right of this head model, we have eyes, nose, ears, and mouth, and things that you can kind of trace over and see what's more realistic, what things you want to slightly bend over, see what things you want to slightly modify or change the curves on certain pieces, curves. And for this, we'll be citing 3 current works in manga that I kind of do admire from time to time, and I think that they're a really good bouncing off point when it comes to someone trying to develop their own style. And for our first example, we're going to be starting with Hirohiko Araki's latest part of his JoJo's Bizarre Adventure manga, Part 9, The JoJo Lands, or as I prefer to call it, JoJo Lands, because JoJo Lands, just get straight to the point, right? And we're going to be referencing the main character of Part 9, Jodio Joestar. You should go read Part 9. It's actually, the first chapter just came out this past month, and I'm already liking it. It's cool. The art style is great, and he's just matured so much over the past, over 30 years that he's been working on this manga. So, up first here, we're just starting with the general head shape, getting the general idea of how Hirohiko Araki uses his lines and his shading and his overall shape of chins and stuff like that. And we're going to go in depth on each facial feature as we go further into this video. So here, of course, I just threw his hair over on top and his jewelry and stuff like that. But that's not really the focus of today. Hair and jewelry will be a discussion for another video, but we're mostly going to focus on things like his eyes, his nose, his mouth, and his ears. Now, one trick that you might want to pick up when it comes to designing and shading for manga and comics is hatching. Hatching tends to be parallel lines that give off the idea of both texture and darkness and shadow and so on. But it can also be used in reverse. Say if you have like a white brush or a white pen, it can be used to highlight things. Now there's traditional hatching, which is just parallel lines. Then there's cross hatching, which is more perpendicular lines crossing over each other, creating kind of like checkered or square shapes. And then you can even play with that and do what I guess you could call diagonal hatching, which is my personal favorite because cross hatching feels a little bit too bulky and a little bit too on the nose. It feels artificial and kind of hard to look at times, whereas diagonal hatching gives it a really nice texture and a smooth idea of what a surface might feel like. So when it comes to hatching for manga, it tends to be the case that the artist is right-handed, and with that being the case, you have a lot of strokes that kind of go from the upper right corner of the page down leftward. That's pretty common to see, and it's kind of accepted for the most part, especially for veterans who don't have the time to necessarily flip the page so much over and over again if they want to get a certain page done. And if you want to kind of cut corners for the sake of reaching an efficient ending, it's fine. You don't have to worry that much about the direction of your shading. Sometimes that might be one piece that you need to sacrifice in the process of getting a page done or a panel done. Now, more specifically, then we have these little bits, so these little mannerisms that he has when it comes to giving a shape definition. Not so much the longer patterns of diagonal cross hatching or diagonal hatching, but these little small little divots of once in a while you'll have like these little lines that give definition, but it's not directional and sweeping across the page. It's these little nuances that might give the impression of someone's cheekbones or someone's indentation of muscles. Araki is a big fan of using this to define shape for his characters, and he's really honed it, especially when it comes to things like the definition of someone's neck, and he would do like little lines going across. Next we have, again, of course, a model of what the average JoJo eye would look like. First of all, most notably, it can be very faithful to a realistic eye, at least especially compared to what other anime eye designs can be like, and I do not like those other designs. I'm very fond of how he stays true to human physiology, but at the same time, you still know that it's him in the way that he hatches, in the way that he gives compliments to the edges under the eyebrow, and the way that your flesh folds over. And then most notably, he'll either have two large highlights in the eye, the lights being caught in the eye that give off like a sense of humanity. Either it'll be two circle ones, or maybe he might have a more triangular one that gives it a really interesting character. His eyebrows tend to be pretty sharp, and he really goes in with the hatching to let you see the texture of it and the directionality, whereas he used to have much more bulky, thick eyebrows that would even go so far as to cross over someone's temple and into their hair. But that's just because he was a big fan of the Fist of the North Star, and big eyebrows were all the rage back then. Of course, next we have the nose, and again, not too far off from what is a typical nose, at least a typical Eurocentric or East Asian nose, but he loves putting emphasis, again, by using that parallel hatching across the bridge or the top of someone's nose. Meanwhile, the bottom is always hit with that hard contrast of the downward hatching. And again, you have these little small indentations, that little sprinkled bit of what you might want to call hatching, but it's somewhere between that and pointillism or stippling. Again, you can play around from it, see what little details. It's all about the little details in the edge work that really give Araki's work that distinct identity. And next we have his mouths. His mouths are very plump. Araki certainly has a affinity for the more model, duck face looking, picturesque, painterly, Greek, Italian, Renaissance art of just feminization of even people who, for the most part, might even just regularly have thin lips. He just loves thick lips. I'm not even going to dance around it. And also notice how, again, hard contrast on the upper lip, whereas the bottom tends to remain relatively undefined, but you still have that cupping between the lower lip and the chin. On the note of the chin, he gives a very interesting definition of like a sort of canopy effect going on in the chin, where it's almost like a flat, hard surface that you would see in like an old video game from the 2000s or the 90s, where the polygons would clip off at the chin and it would just be a hard, straight surface. And that gives it, again, its own distinct type of shape and form that you don't see with other people. It tends to just be a straight line downwards, as we'll see later with these other two art styles that I'll be mentioning. And lastly, we have Araki's ears. Now, his ears I'm very fond of because, again, while up close, when he renders them up close, rendering is a big word that we're going to get to in the coming videos. While he renders them up close as looking very similar to what you would think an average human ear looks like, from far away, he'll kind of betray this realism or this verisimilitude for a more playful, what I like to call just a donut ear. And it's kind of cute and it's funny to look at from far away. It kind of makes his characters look like they're kind of toy figures, especially when it comes to his joints, but different video. And most especially the lobes, the lower lobes of the ears tend to be very thick compared to how other anime and manga artists depict their ears. So that is super cool. Alright, and up next we're going to be referencing Gachi Akuta, a work by, I believe, Kei Kurono. Let's look that up real quick. Oh! Kei Urana. Not the guy from Gantz. I got those mixed up. So first of all, of course, we have the main character Rudo. His hair is actually very distinct, and I don't know if I wanted to put that much time in this video because that's not the main subject, but we're going to get around to the idea of hair rendering, giving it shape, using hatching to give it a form, but that's also very unique. Are the tips of his hair actually darker? Are they gray? Are they black? We don't really quite know, although there are some colored pictures, official artwork done out there roaming around the internet. It has a really unique identity that I don't really see other types of hair being depicted in other manga. Keep in mind, your designs being unique are to a certain degree paramount to your art having its own breadth, and the best way to achieve that is again by taking inspiration from other works and kind of splicing things together, see what works, see what doesn't work. And what exactly inspired this type of hairstyle? I don't know, but I'm loving it. And clearly there's evidence of Kei Urana breaking out of their comfort zone when it comes to doing this type of hairstyle, and I love it. Now let's get into things like the eyes, the nose, and the mouth. The nose is very simplistic for Rudo's design. It's just two general lines. It's just one, you have this small bridge, very childlike, and then a little bit of a cupping under for the sake of like the bunny tip, I guess you might want to call. His mouths are also pretty simple, especially when they're more closed, but then when you have times where it's more open, it is almost indicative of possibly an inspiration of works like My Hero Academia, how it has these big, large teeth, screaming, cartoonish mouths that we'll touch up later on in other videos. Then of course you have his eyes. Now Kei Urana's eyes are very distinctive, and the lines and the shapeliness, it has a graffiti type of texture in how popping out they are, and how decrepit, and they look tired all the time, but they have still this energy about them with the eye bags, but still they're just booming out at you. They feel very reminiscent of the original Osamu Tezuka style of cartoon, where it was heavily inspired by Bambi. You can see like a direct lineage and how it's just popping out at you, and I really do appreciate that. Lastly, let's touch upon Kei Urana's style of doing ears. Now again, up close, it is a slightly very similar depiction of human ears, except kind of sacrificing that weird Y shape that you have in the upper lobe and the upper part of the cartilage. It's just a straight line going downwards, and it's just giving very straight, circular, direct understanding of how the ear is naturally shaped. That part is maybe the sacrifice, and then that can help remove the sense of disbelief when you have rendering from farther away, where it's like, oh, it's just the same shape. It, again, kind of almost has that donut shape, a very simple, cartoony design. And simple can be best at times. You don't have to always be complicated and get into the minutiae of certain things. If anything, I would much rather you prioritize your own little signature touches on the edges of certain surfaces, how you incorporate things like beta and the shadows that hit by certain corners, even things that don't even make sense in terms of lighting direction. That can give your art its own unique look. I would much rather you prioritize that over trying to get as accurate to human physiology as possible, because then you get your own voice in art. Lastly, we have one of the main characters from Dandadan, Momo Ayase. Dandadan, I believe, was made by one of Tatsuki Fujimoto's old assistants, and oh boy, this art is just fantastic in and of itself. I would argue, well, the rendering is much more dedicated than your average Chainsaw Man panel. Not to be like disparaging Chainsaw Man at all, there is brilliance in and of its own simplicity. But in Dandadan, in the way that the hair is rendered, and in the way that the eyes are given so much character with so much detail, it in and of itself it finds its own weird sweet spot between realism and cartoonism that you don't see in other manga, really. The nose is again very simple. You have almost an opposite but perpendicular idea of hatching compared to JoJo's, where instead of going down at the bridge, it goes across at the bridge. And again, very simple, very childlike looking, appearing, very small, and what is deemed as cute by certain standards. And the mouth is also very simple. Again, having that sort of more rounded, caricaturesque style. When it comes to the eyes much more time is dedicated to rendering the interlacing of the pupil and the iris and the color and just the texture of how the inside of your eye actually looks, with, again, of course, a catch, a light getting caught in the eye to give it a sense of humanity, whereas the eyebrows are just very simple and pretty uniform when it comes to character designs. They don't stray that far off from each other. There's not much definition or big, thick experimentation with the eyebrows. It's just very thin. Am I fond of that? Not me personally, but it's a very keen choice that I can tell is intentional, and it again gives the art its own breath, which I think is lovely. And the ears are comically the most simple out of all that we've seen yet. It's like a donut, but not a donut. It's if you take a munchkin and you put the munchkin back in the donut. Like, what is that? But I love it. I love it. And again, from farther away, it makes perfect sense, and it's consistent because it's just playing with human shape. It makes me laugh because it's the idea that we still recognize it as a human ear. It looks nothing like a regular human ear. It looks like a bowl, but it's great because it gets that idea across. The execution is there, and I love it. And lastly, here you can see the final layout without the face modeling sheet in the background, but you can see the final layout that we're probably going to be used to also, I'll take you through a tutorial in another video on how to color and giving depth by using different colors and shades to these templates of these different art styles. Some cases more faithful to the original artist's style of painting or digitally coloring, and maybe sometimes it's my own interpretation, but that's a different video for a different day. And here, again, you can have the original face modeling sheet. Go ahead and screenshot it, whatever, if you want to kind of experiment and play with what you think you want to manipulate in your own art style when it comes to doing facial and head design. In upcoming videos, again, we'll be talking about things like hair and clothing textures and the directional designs of head shapes and understanding depth and looking at character designs in a three-dimensional space, not just two-dimensional. This has been Melting Head Manga. Thank you for watching, and the best thing that you can do to start your manga is just starting your manga. Peace.